Ladies and gentlemen, if you've ever been in an anxious-avoidant relationship, you already know what the push-pull feels like. It feels like love that never gets to rest. It feels like closeness that turns into panic. It feels like silence that turns into obsession. It feels like two good people triggering each other's deepest wounds while still swearing that the love is real. The fastest way to calm an anxious-avoidant relationship is to stop making each other the enemy. Start naming the cycle as the enemy. Because the moment you both believe you are the problem, your nervous systems go to war, and war is where love turns into strategy, defensiveness, and emotional exhaustion. The anxious partner starts building a case. You never show up. You always disappear. You don't care. And underneath that anger is fear. Please don't leave me here alone with this uncertainty. The avoidant partner starts building a counter case. You're too intense. You want too much. I can't breathe. And underneath that defensiveness is fear too. Please don't trap me in emotions I don't know how to manage. So you're not actually fighting about the present moment. You're fighting about safety. And each of you is trying to create safety in ways that trigger the other. The anxious partner pursues to feel secure. The avoidant partner distances to feel secure. And that is the loop, not the villain. When you name the loop out loud, something changes instantly inside the room, because now the conversation is no longer you versus me. It becomes us versus the pattern. This is not soft language for weak people. This is high-level relational intelligence. It's the difference between drowning in a storm and learning how to read the weather. You can say, I think we're in the push-pull right now. And suddenly the anxious partner does. T have to escalate to be seen, and the avoidant partner doesn't have to shut down to feel safe. You're both acknowledging reality without blaming character. You're not saying you're cold. You're saying our cycle is activating. You're not saying you're needy. You're saying our fear is driving the dance. That single reframe removes shame and replaces it with strategy. This also protects love from the most dangerous thing in this dynamic, which is identity-based labels. When the anxious partner believes I am too much, they start shrinking, over-apologizing, and swallowing real needs until resentment builds. When the avoidant partner believes I am broken, they start withdrawing even more, because shame and closeness are a brutal combination. But when you both label the cycle instead of labeling each other, you create a safe space between you, a place where the problem can be observed instead of embodied. Instead of you always abandon me, it becomes when we get triggered. We both go into our protective moves. Instead of you suffocate me, it becomes when I feel pressured, I go quiet, and that silence spikes your anxiety. This is the language of repair. Naming the cycle also stops the anxious partner from turning protest into proof. In the heat of a trigger, the anxious partner often believes, if I push hard enough, if I explain enough, if I show how deeply this hurts, they will finally understand. But avoidants don't experience protest as clarity, they experience it as threat. The more you push, the more their system floods. The more they flood, the more they withdraw. So the anxious partner ends up feeling even more abandoned. And the avoidant partner ends up feeling even more trapped. And both of you can walk away thinking, see, I was right about you. Naming the cycle breaks that confirmation bias. It interrupts the automatic story loops that keep you stuck. For the avoidant partner, this reframe is equally liberating. It removes the pressure of being painted as a villain and replaces it with the chance to be a teammate. Many avoidants actually want love, want closeness, want peace, but they fear being consumed by emotional intensity they don't know how to regulate. When they hear, you are the problem, they retreat. When they hear the pattern is the problem, they have a doorway back into responsibility without drowning in shame. That's huge. It means you can say, I'm getting overwhelmed. I need a reset. And I'm coming back at 8 instead of vanishing for 2 days. It means the avoidant can learn that space doesn't have to be abandonment. It can be a healthy tool when it's structured and communicated. And for the anxious partner, naming the cycle creates self-respect without coldness. You can still want reassurance, still want closeness, still want consistency. But now you can ask for it in a way that doesn't ignite panic. You can say, I can feel myself spiraling. Can you give me a quick reassurance and a time we'll reconnect? That is not chasing, that is secure communication and training. It's you stepping out of the identity of the one who begs and into the identity of the one who names the dynamic and protects the bond. This keynote is not a cute idea. It is the foundation, because you cannot fix a cycle you keep personalizing. You cannot build safety while you're assigning blame as identity. The relationship starts to heal when both of you can pause mid-trigger and say, we're in the loop. Let's slow this down, because that sentence turns two frightened nervous systems into two conscious adults who are finally willing to fight for the relationship without fighting each other. The anxious partner doesn't ruin the relationship because they have needs. They struggle because the needs often come out wrapped in panic, protest, and emotional overload. And the avoidant partner doesn't hear the need. They hear the alarm. They hear intensity. They hear, I'm about to be responsible for your nervous system. So the anxious person ends up doing more, explaining more, pushing more. And the avoidant ends up shutting down harder because protest doesn't land as love. It lands as threat. This is why the shift from protest to clean, direct needs is not a small tweak. It is a full nervous system upgrade. It's the difference between shouting into a storm and speaking into a door that can actually open. Protest is what happens when fear is driving the wheel. It looks like long paragraphs, repeated calls, checking, testing, accusing, pulling out the most painful version of the truth in a way that almost dares the other person to fail. The anxious partner might say, you never care, you always leave, you're just like everyone else. But what they're really saying underneath that armor is, I'm scared, I feel unsafe, I need to know we're okay. The problem is the avoidant partner doesn't have the capacity to sift through the armor in real time. They get flooded by the emotional volume and their system goes into containment mode, silence, distance, shut down. So the anxious partner feels abandoned. The protest becomes louder and the loop deepens. Clean needs are different. Clean needs are what you say when you're still emotional, but you're not weaponizing the emotion. Clean needs are language that reduces threat and increases clarity. Instead of, why are you doing this to me? It becomes, when you go quiet without a heads up, my anxiety spikes. I need a short message that you're taking space and a time we'll reconnect. Instead of, you don't care about me, it becomes, I need reassurance when we're disconnected, even if it's brief. Instead of, I'm done, this always happens, it becomes, I want to stay close to you, and I also need consistency to feel safe. That change sounds simple, but it's massive, because now the avoidant partner hears a request they can actually respond to instead of a tidal wave they have to escape. This doesn't mean the anxious partner must become emotionless or perfectly regulated on command. It means they learn to pause for a beat before speaking from the most triggered version of themselves. It means they learn to separate feeling from strategy. Your feelings are valid, your fear is real, but your strategy has to be effective. And protest is rarely effective with an avoidant. Protest can get a reaction, but it doesn't get growth. It can get momentary closeness, but it won't build long-term safety. Clean, direct needs build a bridge instead of a courtroom. The anxious partner also has to unlearn the belief that bigger emotion equals bigger seriousness. Many anxious systems learned early on that they only get attention when they escalate. So when they feel disconnection, they subconsciously believe, if I don't make this intense enough, I won't be heard. But in an anxious-avoidant dynamic, intensity is not a megaphone. It's a smoke alarm. The avoidant does not interpret your intensity as devotion. They interpret it as danger. So the real power move for the anxious partner is to stay firm without being frantic, to be clear without being chaotic, to be emotionally honest without becoming emotionally explosive. This is where self-regulation becomes the quiet superpower. Even just a 30-second pause can change everything. A breath, a walk to the kitchen, a hand on your chest, a reminder that your fear is ancient, but the moment is current. You're not delaying the conversation to suppress your needs. You're delaying it to express them in a way that gives the relationship a chance. Because when you speak cleanly, you give your partner the dignity of knowing exactly what you need. And you give yourself the dignity of not begging in a language that keeps backfiring. Clean needs also prevent the anxious partner from becoming a mind reader. Instead of demanding reassurance in vague ways that leave room for disappointment, you give specifics. I need a check-in tonight. I need a good night text when we're tense. I need you to say, I'm not leaving, I'm just overwhelmed. Avoidants often do better with concrete emotional tasks than with emotional generalities. You're not asking them to become a different person overnight. You're asking them to practice relational safety in steps that are doable. And the most important part is that clean needs come with boundaries, not threats. A boundary sounds like, I won't stay in a relationship where silence is used instead of communication. It doesn't sound like, if you don't reply in 10 minutes, I'm leaving forever. The anxious partner learns to let their standards speak without using fear as a weapon. That's how your nervous system matures, from chasing love to choosing it wisely. When the anxious partner replaces protest with clean, direct needs, they stop flooding the relationship with panic and start offering a map. They move from please don't leave me energy to here's what helps me feel safe to stay connected to you energy. And that changes the emotional temperature of everything that follows. The push-pull doesn't stop just because you love each other, it stops when you build a structure strong enough to hold two different nervous systems at the same time. And that's why structured space, not disappearing acts, is one of the most life-changing rules in an anxious-avoidant relationship. Because the truth is, both of you need space. Sometimes the avoidant needs it to downshift from overwhelm. The anxious partner needs it to stop spiraling and regain self-control. But the difference between healing and heartbreak is whether that space has a container, a time frame, and a return plan. When space is unstructured, it turns into abandonment. The avoidant goes quiet when they're flooded. I can't do this right now. And they disappear for hours or days without explanation. The anxious partner doesn't experience that as neutrality. They experience it as emotional free fall. Their mind doesn't say they're overwhelmed. It says, I'm being left. I'm not safe. I'm about to be replaced. And once that fear ignites, the anxious partner does what anxious systems do to survive. They pursue, they protest, they text, they call, they demand clarity, not because they want to control, but because their body is begging for certainty. The avoidant then feels the pressure and the intensity, and their system goes even deeper into shutdown. Now, you're not just in space, you're in a full-blown nervous system collision. Structured space changes this because it respects the avoidant's need to regulate without turning the anxious partner's heart into a hostage. It says, we're not banning space, we're making space safe. That is a mature relationship move. Because the avoidant is not being asked to stay in the fire, and the anxious partner is not being asked to sit in terror with no timeline. Structured space is the bridge between intimacy and autonomy. This can look incredibly simple, but it's powerful. A phrase like, I'm getting overwhelmed. I need 90 minutes to reset. I'm not leaving. I'll call you at 8:30. That one sentence can save the relationship. It gives the avoidant permission to breathe, and it gives the anxious partner a target time their nervous system can hold. The anxious partner doesn't have to chase because a return is already promised. The avoidant doesn't have to vanish because they're not being forced to process everything in the peak of dysregulation. Now, here's the important part. Structured space is not a loophole for avoidance. It's not a way to escape every hard conversation forever. It's a temporary regulation tool with a return on the calendar. If the avoidant uses I need space to disappear for 2 days, 3 days, a week, while the anxious partner is sitting in uncertainty, that's not regulation, that's emotional abandonment disguised as self-care. So the rule must include boundaries. Space is allowed. Disappearing is not. The anxious partner also has a responsibility here. When the avoidant asks for a structured reset, the anxious partner must learn to honor it without turning it into a test. This is tough, because anxious systems often interpret pause as punishment. But the moment you hear, I'm coming back at 8:30, your job becomes protecting the peace of the next conversation. That means you regulate your own system during the reset. Your mind will want to write angry speeches, plan ultimatums, rehearse the worst case scenario. Instead, you practice a new identity, the one that says, I can feel fear without letting it drive the car. Structured space can also be agreed upon in advance, like a relationship safety plan. You decide together that when conflict spikes above a certain level, you'll take a timeout with rules, no insults, no breakup threats, no disappearing. You choose a time frame that's realistic. 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. You commit to a return phrase, we're back on the same team. You normalize the pause before you ever need it. That proactive agreement is what transforms a fragile dynamic into a repairable one. Why does this work so well? Because the anxious-avoidant relationship isn't usually a lack of love problem. It's a lack of regulation problem. The anxious partner is alarm first. The avoidant partner is escape first. Structured space interrupts both automatic reactions. It gives the anxious partner something they crave with their whole body, certainty. And it gives the avoidant something they desperately need to stay engaged, time to decompress without being chased. But the deeper magic is what it teaches both of you over time. The avoidant learns that asking for space responsibly doesn't equal losing love. The anxious partner learns that space doesn't automatically mean abandonment. You both start associating distance with health instead of threat. And that reconditioning is huge, because without it, even small conflicts feel like relationship-ending emergencies. If you want to stop the push-pull, you don't try to eliminate your differences. You build a system that respects them. Structured space is one of those systems. It's not romantic in the Hollywood sense, but it's deeply loving in the grown-up sense. It says, I care about us enough to not make you process this in panic. I care about me enough to not accept silence as a relationship tool. That is how safety is built, not through perfect harmony, but through reliable repair. The difference between a relationship that survives the anxious-avoidant push-pull and one that collapses under it is not whether you fight, it's whether you know how to come back together after the fight. Because conflict is normal, but unresolved conflict becomes a slow poison that turns love into suspicion, resentment, and emotional self-protection. An anxious partner doesn't usually panic. Because of one disagreement, they panic. Because the disagreement feels like the beginning of disappearance, the beginning of silence, the beginning of emotional exile, and an avoidant partner doesn't usually shut down because of one hard conversation. They shut down because the emotional intensity feels like a trap with no exit. So when repair is missing, you both start anticipating pain before it even happens. The anxious partner becomes hypervigilant. The avoidant partner becomes pre-avoidant. And you start living in a relationship that is bracing for impact instead of building intimacy. A repair ritual is non-negotiable because your nervous systems need proof of safety, not just promises of love. The anxious partner needs to experience the truth that we can have tension and still be okay. The avoidant partner needs to experience the truth that we can talk about hard things without me being swallowed or shamed. And that kind of learning doesn't happen once. It happens through repetition. Without a ritual, every conflict becomes a new improvisation. And improvisation is dangerous when your attachment systems are already sensitive. Because the anxious partner may escalate to avoid being ignored. The avoidant partner may withdraw to avoid being overwhelmed. And then both of you interpret your survival strategy as proof the other person is unsafe. Repair is what interrupts that false story. What does a real repair ritual look like? It's not a dramatic apology followed by a romantic night that sweeps everything under the rug. It's not one long exhausting talk where the anxious partner empties their whole emotional history while the avoidant partner dissociates. Repair is structured, predictable, and respectful. It can be as simple as agreeing that after any heated moment you will come back within a set window, even if it's just 20 minutes, and ask 4 steady questions. What did you hear me say? What were you feeling? In that moment, what can you own? And what do you need next time? This is not therapy language for the sake of sounding mature. This is the scaffolding that keeps your bond from collapsing under the weight of misinterpretation. For the anxious partner, this ritual is a lifesaver because it replaces emotional guessing with emotional certainty. Instead of sitting in a silent house, staring at a quiet phone, and writing worst-case narratives, you know there is a path back. You know there is a return plan. You know the conflict won't turn into days of anxiety and self-blame. That predictability alone can lower your protest because you no longer have to chase closure in panic. You can wait for in structure. For the avoidant partner, this ritual is equally protective because it sets boundaries around the emotional space. You're not being ambushed by a 3-hour emotional marathon. You're not being asked to process everything at once. You have a clean roadmap that says, we are doing repair, not interrogation, and that reduces the felt threat that usually drives you into shutdown. Repair also needs one crucial rule that most couples ignore. You do not talk to each other like enemies. When you're triggered, your language becomes sharper, your tone becomes more absolute. You start using words, always and never, and those words are attachment grenades. The anxious partner says, you never care. The avoidant partner hears, you are failing as a person, and their system collapses into defensiveness or silence. The avoidant partner says, you're too much. The anxious partner hears, your feelings make you unlovable, and their system erupts into panic. A repair ritual replaces those grenades with accountability and specificity. When you went quiet after I shared something vulnerable, I felt unsafe. When you texted 5 times in a row without pausing, I felt flooded. That language doesn't erase the pain. It makes the pain workable. Another part of repair is timing. Anxious partners often want to fix things immediately because uncertainty feels unbearable. Avoidants often want to delay because intensity feels suffocating. So repair must be time-bound and mutually agreed. You might say, we'll take 60 minutes to cool down, then we'll talk for 20 minutes using our repair question. That agreement respects both nervous systems, and it turns the relationship from reactive to intentional. The message becomes, we don't disappear from conflict, we manage it. Over time, this ritual becomes your relationship's immune system. It doesn't prevent every flare-up, but it prevents infection. It stops one bad moment from turning into a week of icy distance and desperate pursuit. It helps you build a track record of safe repair. And that track record begins to rewrite your attachment history together. The anxious partner learns, I don't have to fight for your return with panic. The avoidant partner learns, I don't have to protect myself by vanishing, and slowly the push-pull loses its fuel because the relationship becomes a place where discomfort doesn't equal danger. It equals an opportunity to come back stronger, clearer, and more secure than before. In an anxious-avoidant relationship, one of the most invisible reasons you burn out is not the conflict itself. It's the imbalance of emotional leadership, because the anxious partner often becomes the full-time manager of intimacy. They initiate the talks, they plan the quality time, they bring up the hard stuff, they repair the ruptures, they keep the emotional lights on. And at first, it looks like devotion, it looks like I care more, but over time it becomes a quiet form of loneliness. Because love is not supposed to feel like you're carrying a relationship on your back while the other person benefits from the warmth without learning how to build the fire. This is why the fifth keynote matters so much. The avoidant must learn to initiate, not perfectly, not constantly, but consistently enough that the anxious partner's nervous system no longer has to chase proof of love. Because when only one person is leading emotionally, the dynamic turns into a parent-child pattern. One person regulates, one person resists, and attraction, safety, and trust slowly erode under the weight of that imbalance. The anxious partner's pursuit is often misunderstood as needy, but what it frequently is compensation. They are compensating for a vacuum, for the absence of proactive connection, for the lack of predictable check-ins, for the long silences that leave them guessing, so they fill the gap harder and harder, hoping that if they carry enough, the relationship will finally stabilize. But the more they carry, the less the avoidant has to step forward. The avoidant unconsciously learns, if I wait long enough, they'll bring it up. If I go quiet, they'll chase. If I pull back, they'll fill the space. And the anxious partner unconsciously learns, if I don't lead, love disappears. That belief is exhausting because it means you can never rest. You can never be soft without fear. You can never stop monitoring the connection because you've been trained to think your effort is the only thing keeping the bond alive. Balancing emotional leadership is the moment you stop confusing anxiety-driven management with intimacy. It's when you both accept that a relationship cannot be repaired by one nervous system alone. The avoidant doesn't need to become a different personality, but they must become a more responsible partner. Initiation is not just romantic, it is regulatory. When an avoidant starts a weekly check-in, send a simple thinking of you, names their need for space with a return time, or asks, how are we doing? They are doing something far bigger than texting. They are lowering the anxious partner. As baseline fear, they are telling their partner's body, you do not have to chase me to matter. And here's the truth that makes this hard for avoidance. Initiation requires vulnerability before comfort. Avoidants are used to responding, not leading, because responding lets them stay in control of distance. Initiating means stepping toward closeness without being forced. And for an avoidant, that can feel like walking into a spotlight. It triggers fear of expectation, fear of failure, fear of being inadequate. But this is exactly where growth happens. A small, consistent act of initiation teaches their nervous system that closeness is not a trap. It can be chosen, paced, and safe. It also prevents the avoidant from only showing up when they fear loss, because many avoidants initiate only when the anxious partner finally withdraws, which turns love into a crisis response system, not a stable bond. For the anxious partner, this keynote is also a call to stop over-functioning, because sometimes the anxious person is so used to leading that they don't know how to allow space for the other person to step up. They jump in too fast. They fill every pause. They rescue the conversation before it gets uncomfortable. And that can unintentionally reinforce the avoidance passivity. So part of balance is the anxious partner learning to say calmly, I'm not going to be the only one who keeps this alive, not with threats, not with drama, but with a new standard of mutuality, letting silence reveal truth, letting effort be shared, letting the relationship breathe without one person constantly pumping oxygen into it alone. This is where trust becomes behavioral, not theoretical. The avoidance initiation doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be reliable enough to build a new rhythm. A short daily check-in, a weekly relationship temperature check, a simple, I'm overwhelmed, I care, I'll be back at this time. These are not small things to an anxious nervous system. They're proof that love is not something you must earn by chasing. And over time, that proof reduces protest. You'll notice the anxious partner becomes more grounded, less reactive, more secure in their voice, because they are no longer fighting alone for basic contact. When emotional leadership is balanced, the whole dynamic reorients. The anxious partner stops feeling like a beggar and starts feeling like a partner. The avoidant stops feeling like intimacy is an ambush and start feeling like it's a choice they can make without losing themselves. The push-pull doesn't end because you promised to love each other harder. It ends because you built a structure where both people are responsible for the emotional climate. Both people initiate repair, both people create safety, and no one has to disappear or overperform just to keep the relationship breathing. The anxious-avoidant dynamic becomes so addictive because it often confuses intensity with intimacy. You fight hard, you miss each other hard, you reunite with overwhelming relief. And your nervous system interprets that roller coaster as passion, as proof that the connection is special. But what's really happening is that your bodies are reacting to threat and relief, not necessarily to stable love. That's why the final keynote matters, because real healing doesn't come from bigger emotions. It comes from steadier patterns. It comes from reassurance becoming consistent, space becoming respectful, and peace becoming the new standard, not something you earn once a month after a blow-up. The anxious partner can become unknowingly attached to the drama cycle for one simple reason: drama guarantees attention. When things are calm, the anxious nervous system can still feel suspicious. Is everything okay? Are they pulling away quietly? Am I about to be blindsided? But when conflict erupts, at least the connection is activated, at least the relationship is in motion, at least they are engaged, even if it's messy. And the avoidant partner can also become attached to the cycle in a different way, because intensity gives them a familiar justification to retreat. This is too much. I need space. So both of you can end up locked into a pattern where chaos feels normal and calm feels unfamiliar. The relationship then becomes a cycle of rupture and relief instead of a rhythm of connection and repair. Choosing steadiness over intensity starts with redefining what love feels like in your body. Healthy love is not constant fireworks. It's reliable warmth. It is not constant emotional emergencies. It is a sense of safety that lets you sleep, focus, and live. When reassurance becomes consistent, the anxious partner's nervous system stops treating silence as danger, because silence is no longer the norm. They know there is a baseline of contact, check-ins, and care that doesn't require panic to activate. That consistency becomes the antidote to protest. The anxious partner doesn't have to push as hard because the relationship is already moving toward them in small, predictable ways. For the avoidant partner, consistency is also liberating. The avoidant often withdraws not because they don't care, but because they feel overloaded by the way closeness shows up: sudden emotional floods, long urgent talks, demands in the heat of fear. When the anxious partner learns to communicate cleanly and the relationship adopts structured space, the avoidant can stay present longer. They don't feel ambushed. They don't feel like intimacy is a courtroom. So steadiness isn't a threat to their independence. It becomes a safer pathway to connection. Respectful space is crucial here. Without it, the anxious partner interprets every request for space as abandonment, and the avoidant interprets every request for reassurance as control. Respectful space means time-bound, communicated, and returned to. It sounds like, I'm overwhelmed. I care about us. I need an hour. I'll come back at 9, not days of silence. That one practice rewires both nervous systems. The anxious partner learns that space can be a healthy pause, not a relational death sentence. The avoidant learns they can ask for space without detonating the relationship. This reduces the likelihood of blow-ups, because neither person is forced into an extreme. Peace becomes the new standard when you stop rewarding the cycle. In many anxious-avoidant relationships, the biggest emotional closeness happens only after near breakups. The anxious partner protests until the avoidant panics about losing them. The avoidant returns with warmth and apology. The anxious partner feels seen again. The relief is enormous. And so the brain unconsciously learns, this is how connection happens here. It requires crisis. But crisis-based intimacy is not intimacy. It's survival bonding. To change this, both of you must start creating connection before the cliff. The avoidant initiates check-ins without being chased. The anxious partner expresses needs before the explosion. You repair early, not after emotional damage piles up. This keynote is also a warning sign. If one person refuses steadiness, refuses structured space, refuses repair, then the relationship cannot be healed by intensity. You can cry harder, love harder, explain harder, but you can't out-emote a refusal to build safe patterns. The anxious partner must be willing to stop using threats, monitoring, and panic as strategies. The avoidant partner must be willing to stop disappearing, stonewalling, or postponing every hard conversation indefinitely. Both must choose the boring, beautiful work of building trust in small daily ways. And here's the payoff. When peace becomes the standard, The anxious partner doesn't have to live on emotional alert. They start to feel calm attraction again instead of anxious fixation. The avoidant doesn't have to defend their autonomy like a fortress. They start to feel closeness as chosen rather than imposed. The relationship stops being a nervous system tug-of-war and becomes a partnership where both people can breathe. So the real shock is this: the healthiest version of love in an anxious, avoidant relationship may feel less dramatic than what you're used to. It may feel quieter. It may feel slower. It may even feel unfamiliar at first, but that unfamiliar calm is not boredom. It's safety. And safety is what finally turns chemistry into something you can build a life on.